And hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate your presence and you showing up in this space among comrades and fellow travelers. Much obliged to be co-hosting this event this evening with a very special person that I'm about to introduce. So, wars upon us. Black Lives Matter's challenge to white supremacy and empire. As the nationwide uprising for racial justice takes center stage in the United States, we examine the connection between white supremacy and empire and ask how to build a durable movement for liberation, nationally and internationally. Our speaker, Reverend Karlene Griffiths Sekou, organizes with Black Lives Matter Boston. She is an international public speaker, preacher, scholar, and has over 20 years of experience working in grassroots community organizing and development, human rights advocacy, health equity, and cultural regeneration. She'll be in dialogue with Mass Peace Action Board member Jared Hicks, that's me. And this event is co-sponsored by BLM Boston. So I am Jared Hicks, he, him. I live in Dorchester, here in Boston. I'm sure we're getting visitors from all over the city, the state, maybe beyond. That would be very exciting. Thank you again for being here. My background is in electoral and political organizing, as well as union and labor organizing. I'm going to show off the shirt. U.S. Labor Against the War. This is my premiere this evening. I just busted it out for a special occasion. So please support U.S. Labor Against the War. Only 15 bucks for a very nice, flashy yellow t-shirt. And I'm a Mass Peace Action board member. Mass Peace Action is a grassroots peace and justice organization. We are a statewide group that focuses on anti-war, anti-militarism, anti-imperialism projects. We're grassroots funded by people like you, so please consider contributing. Thank you so much for supporting this organization, again, with your presence, with you being here and participating and actively engaging in these world-shaking events and matters of real consequence for people's lives globally. So thank you again for being part of this. I'm now going to pass it off to Karlene, who has a very special treat and surprise for you all.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good to see comrades, old faces, or familiar faces, I should say, and new faces. Cole, will you start the video, please?
Okay, you ready for the video? Here goes. Let's see here.
Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, do I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed.
How you coming there,
Be
Junior?
ashamed which transgress without cause. Show
How
me
long
thy
before?
ways, O Lord. Show me thy path. Lead me in thy
Son,
way.
you're going to be seeing some things that may not set too well.
Do I wait all
we get home, I got enough of that peach brandy for both of us.
According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. This'll only last a moment. Think about it like you're leaping over a wide ditch. And when you land, you'll be in heaven.
Junior, I'll be jumping over a big ditch. Heaven's on the other side.
Is there anything you want to say? Any last words?
Please, can we go?
Emma Thames. This was back in the year 1944. Now, it turns out he did not do any of those things.
Oh,
And just
stop there, please. Thank you. For those who are unfamiliar with the story of George Stinney, the 14-year-old who remains the youngest victim of state-sponsored murder, the death penalty in the United States, who was also innocent. As we know that this is a common occurrence in our justice system. But the point in showing the video is not so much to have a conversation about the death penalty or the morality of the death penalty or whether or not children should be subject to the death penalty. Our title is War Upon Us, from the perspective of the state of Black lives within the United States of America. War upon us from the perspective of anti-Blackness and racism, which are features of white supremacy. And so bearing witness to George Stinney is bearing witness to over 400 years of murder of Black lives. And we're still in that moment. The most recent visible executions of Black people, we're well aware of the litany of names: George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and most recently, the most publicized anyway, Jacob Blake. And fortunately, he lives. However, will be likely paralyzed. And so I want us to think about this as a long durée of history that is still present with us today in very much the same ways, be it police murders, be it the white supremacist structures and systems that still create Jim and Jane Crow segregation and separation that perpetuates the caste system that exists within the United States. To think about it as economic inequality, to think about it as living within the COVID-19 pandemic, and those fault lines are clear when disproportionately Black folk are impacted by COVID-19 by virtue of inequities in healthcare, health disparities that pre-existed, economic disparities around extraction of wage labor that doesn't afford the same privileges to remain at home or to work from home as others, or to have adequate access to testing, and the inordinate amount of money that is extracted from our taxes, extracted from our communities to support a military and imperialist systems that could be redirected back into our communities. When we think about those who are being evicted, there is a moratorium, so to speak, but those who have hovering over their lives, the liminal and precariousness of housing. We're talking about a condition, a state of being Black in the United States of America. And so we can go on and talk about the uprisings that are happening, but fundamentally, this is a question about the state of the soul and the heart of this imploding, in my estimation, empire, and who we are as human beings, who we choose to be as people in this moment. And this moment presents a tremendous opportunity, right? As an organizer and one existing within the long internationalist and radical Black liberation tradition. This is a moment of tremendous opportunity. It continues to be painful, it continues to be violent, it continues to be death dealing. But as people of African descent in the United States, we are not dissuaded by the severity of the problem or by the depths of the darkness. We are persuaded by the vision, the imagination, the strength, the genius, and the courage of our legacy and the ancestors who fought and who believed that there is a better way of being human, there is a better vision for a democracy in which all people are actually accorded the sacred worth and dignity inherent in all of us. And lest you believe that this problem only impacts those who are targeted and surveilled and incarcerated and murdered and jailed and oppressed by white supremacist systems, not only people of African descent, but all others who buy into and who are co-opted and who are privileged and benefit from white supremacy. Whiteness is a sickness. Whiteness is a disease in so much of it as it effaces the dignity and humanity and sacred worth of those who have been racialized by such a category and given the privileges of violent systems that uphold segregation and xenophobia and a hierarchy of humanity. And so we are here together, I believe, and those who are allies and those who seek to be in solidarity with this great struggle, not only alongside the Black radical liberation struggle, but also on behalf of the best of all of us, including those who are inheritors of white supremacy and who benefit from it and who live according to its privileges. And so that is where I find hope. That is a part of our conversation this evening and whatever else emerges, and you too will be a part of that conversation. And I look forward, Jared, to our exchange. I don't want to sit up here and be a talking head. So I'm going to stop there and move us forward as Jared sees fit.
That's a difficult challenge. No one ever wants to follow you, Reverend. And I don't mind you being a talking head. I said that before the program began. Alas, here I am to help and assist in facilitating everyone else sort of trying to grasp and comprehend your genius and depth of wisdom in this very difficult time and moment that we're in. I want to take some space, if folks wouldn't mind, just a moment after what we witnessed and the words of Karlene, to just pause and reflect and think about how you're feeling and what we're called to do. The fact that we're here, this matters. This makes a difference to me. When I hear the news, which feels daily, of Black death, of suffering, of harassment, of discrimination, of indignities, constant and persistent and pervasive, that's a great burden for many to bear and to shoulder and to walk through life with. That's a tax that we pay every day.
Yes.
And I believe that more and more folks of goodwill and of conscience are hopefully, if not awakening to these realities that we experience, though folks cannot personally or directly necessarily understand that there is an effort to be in solidarity, which is not charity, that's not sympathy. I want to know who's standing shoulder to shoulder with me in the trenches and willing to sacrifice and put things on the line in a real, significant, substantial way. That's my only interest in what they call allyship. That sense of camaraderie means that you are sharing the fight and you are willing to do what's necessary. People like John Brown were allies. That's my standard anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, I have comrades who would think likewise. I'm very grateful to just be here and be part of this discussion and dialogue with Karlene, who's someone I've admired and respected for years. She helped organize thousands upon thousands of people on July 4th for the Say Her Name, Black Liberation, BLM Boston organized and sponsored march and rally from Dudley Square, now known as Nubian Square, to the Common. And I've been to most of the major protests and demonstrations, the marches, the vigils this summer of uprising, of rebellion in Boston. And this was probably the most sacred and special to me. It felt holy, it felt grounded, it centered Black women and non-men. And that was really important to see and witness and be part of with so many others, Black, brown, and white, and so forth. So the centering and the grounding of the stakes and of our position and where we are and what we're called to do, I take that responsibility very seriously. And I think as activists, as organizers of people of goodwill and conscience, we all have to find ways in however we can to be present and participate and show up and do what's necessary and follow the leadership of Black folks in the fight for liberation, in this struggle that has been going on forever. So when we talk about global empire, we have to understand that the United States is in a very particular position as a hegemonic superpower that bullies and dictates through economic means, through military means, through diplomatic means, its will. We, as a nation, our will is imposed violently against others. And we're seeing with this current administration, nothing new, I want to point out, I want to clarify that, nothing new, exaggerated, exposed, exacerbated, bragged about, sort of naked, but we should take stock of folks in power of any party, any major political party, with great clout and influence and decision-making power, who are inflicting upon us and folks around the world policies that do not uplift human life, dignity, safety, security, protection. So I think as you know, as Americans in particular, we have a certain role to play in the position that America is in. And that goes beyond voting, that goes beyond elections. That's about movement. And I'm part of all of this because I believe in movement politics and movement building and being in community with folks who are willing to fight. Karlene, do you have more thoughts you'd like to bestow upon us?
You know, I appreciate the, can you all hear me okay, first of all? Yes?
Yes, yes.
This reflexivity about this moment, and so much in the video that we showed. One can choose to have a distal gaze and say it was then and at that time, or them and those kinds of people, not us, not my kind, not the North, certainly not New England. We can choose a distal gaze, and in some way, which, you know, might be a normal human thing to do, particularly when it is such horrible things, and we have some may have a hard time seeing themselves as a participant in such an act, the murder of a child, right? For those of us who have children in their lives, how easy is it to see a child, right? And so their audiences, so those who participated because they were employed, because it was their job to carry this out, to uphold the system and the rules and the laws in the state, those who were members of a community, who watched or remained silent. And we saw how the transmission from generation to generation takes place. The very innocence and rupture of another child that is looking, whose basic impulse was to be horrified and empathetic and to wince and to cry and to know inherently something is wrong and this is a wrong thing, but the elder, right, forced participation and forced a numbing and a deadening of that humanity, with promise of some pie, I think, or some cobbler or whatever it was. And, you know, it makes me think about where we are in this particular moment, right? And the calls for abolition. We're in a moment of abolishment of those kinds of systems, uprooting this kind of mentality. And self-reflexivity in all the ways that we may benefit from, we as individuals, but those for whom it is constructed, those whom it protects, those on behalf of whom this nation, the United States of America, I prefer to say North America, because it isn't center of all of the Americas, but because it's empire and has military and economic might, presupposes and co-ops to geographically other geographies and peoples and cultures, right? That is the role of empire, is to stretch its tentacles and to entrench and to claim the lives of others and the cultures and land of others, right? And so, you know, how are we participating? How uncomfortable it must be to hear calls to defund the police, right? How uncomfortable it must mean to hear calls to abolish policing as we know it altogether, and trust that communities know and can reimagine a system if given the resources and opportunity to do so, that thrives on protection and honoring the lives of community members and figuring out a way of restorative justice. If we only took that chance, how much trust do we put in the guns that the police that walk the beat in our neighborhoods, who are our sons and our daughters, our son-in-laws, the wonderful human beings that we know, to recognize that this isn't about them. This is about a system that once they put that badge on, they might as well be putting a hood on and riding the streets of Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Because that's symbolically and materially, praxeologically, practically what happens. And so it is that dance between the distal and them and they out there, and the sense of help that creates a sense of removal, false security and helplessness to this grand problem, versus something that is very personal and intimate, that we have the power, that you have the power, each and every one of us have the power to impact and decide to get a little uncomfortable. You used allyship, Jared. And allyship is fine if that's where you are. Own it for what it is, and no one can move you from allyship. But what we need are those who are in solidarity, that recognize that this is too your fight, a fight for the minds and the hearts of the young children that you love. And you are bequeathing a legacy to them as well, and honoring their humanity as well, to say that there is a better way, a more expansive and generous and divine and sacred way, rather, to be, in addition, to be human. And that's what we're struggling for here. And so it is your fight too. And then we can make a different reality together. This is why I love the young people, the people, they're not all young people, but certainly generations that are following, is that they believe, because we've seen what has happened. They've seen that their futures have been stolen, that their humanity is not being affirmed to the fullness, right? And are willing to put their lives on the line, their bodies on the line. And so, yes, that's where I want us to wrestle and struggle, and we can ground it in particulars in our communities, or we can take it in any direction. I look forward to hearing from others, having other voices in the conversation as well. So I'll pause there, Jared.
Thank you, Karlene. Something I'd like to remark upon is the defund the police demand. And Karlene spoke to this very eloquently already, but I'd like to say, you know, I've had conversations with folks who find that uncomfortable, radical, too much, too far, too fast, extreme, a loser electorally or politically, not popular enough. And I always want to ask folks when I hear and see these things, how popular do you think abolition was in the 19th century for enslaved people that generated American capitalism, that built an entire system of wealth based on blood and subjugation and degradation and destruction? How many people thought that women's suffrage was popular? We've been talking about that struggle and a 100-year anniversary of white women, primarily, finally earning their franchise and right to vote and fully participate as citizens in our United States. What is legal or popular or a winning narrative or slogan is not how I center my moral compass. That is not my North Star or guiding light or the way I move and operate through the world. So I would ask folks to plant stakes in the ground and hold fast and be firm in conviction, in a sense of, you know, what's wrong is wrong, and you can have a lot of people telling you otherwise, but what's right is right. And we are going to continue to face and weather enormous storms of every kind and variety. And I need to know, for my own peace of mind, that there is a substantial group of people, even in a minority, that see through the fog and see past the horizon, see past the limited scope and imagination that they themselves may hold, to think beyond. And I want to make very clear, when Karlene talks about abolition of police, prison systems, oppressive structures, again, nothing new, nothing different. It's just back in the center. It's back in the mainstream eye. It's being talked about at a higher rate and to a greater degree, perhaps, than in recent memory. And I just want to honor our ancestors and folks who brought us to this place, who brought us here, where we are able to call upon them for their strength and wisdom and carry forth the battle that we continue to wage. I look to my family for sustenance and hope and community. I think that's for folks who have that benefit and privilege and luxury of having loved ones close to you, that see things that way. It's a great source for me of fortitude and of armor as I walk through this world. So when we talk about defunding the police. I want to limit the amount of contact that police officers have with people that look like me, that are darker than me, that have so much to lose, where the stakes are so high, they're so great. The only way we're going to feel safe is if all of it changes. And however people come to that conclusion and realization and then commitment to action, so be it. But to me, that's where I'm going. And I hope that folks join me.
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking about over here, you know, we say in our movement in the Black liberation struggle, until Black people are free, no one is free. Until all Black people are free and no one is free. And I, you know, cannot help even in that context then to acknowledge, you know, Indigenous folk. And we're talking about the women's movement, but you know, the women's rights, movement wasn't a movement for Black women, right? All the men, but if we're talking about liberation, we have to consider sort of these interlocking systems, right? So I can't talk about Black liberation without it leading and connecting to the liberation of others. I think, and I hope that everyone here understands why we say Black Lives Matter. It's not because we don't know that Black Lives Matter. It's not because Black folk don't know that. Black lives have always mattered. Black lives are the very reason why many other lives are able to thrive and flourish on the backs of Black people, namely white lives, right? It isn't that, it's to affirm that Black lives do matter and that Black lives should be treated as such, right? And that's all Black lives. That's all of the multiplicity of ways that a greater and grander imagination, one of more capaciousness and generosity, imagined our humanity, right? Over and against those who would want to limit it to only male identified people having access to freedom and the fullness of power, on over and against women identified folk or able-bodied folk, the way that we have understand or imagined it. And I can go on and on and on and name all of the interlocking liberation struggles that we fight for. I can't help but think what a travesty it is that it had to have taken all of these hundreds of years to try to raise the consciousness to see that all humanity, people's lives are sacred, and that we have the capacity to imagine. You know, the US is way behind other nations who are further along. That's not to reify or say they're perfect in any imagination, but access to high quality health, the assumption that everybody deserves health care, that everybody deserves a home, safety, food, enough food. And when we see conversations about multiple billions of dollars available to wage war, multiple billions of dollars siphoned or given to 1% of a group of people. It's insane. It's insanity to me. It's insanity. And the impulse is to think, wow, this is so huge. It's overwhelming. It's to get overwhelmed, and people do get overwhelmed. Some of us don't have the luxury of retreat, don't have the privilege of stepping in and out of the battle. We don't have that privilege, that luxury, not at any time or any moment, not in any system anywhere, not at school, not in the hospital, not walking our dog in the park, not your children in the playground, not being adolescents in the ways that adolescents are at no time do Black people have that luxury just to be. We seize it, we claim it, we step into it at great peril every time we do so. But we have that power. Right? And I think this is the task of having an abolitionist mentality, is to say we've been patching it, we've been reforming it, we've been tweaking it, we've been trying to do different kinds of diversity and inclusion and before that, multiculturalism. We've been trying to not reimagine the structure, right? We've been moving around the furniture in a room. And I can't help but to invoke a great ancestor, MLK, that says, this is a burning house. What use is it to be rearranging furniture? Are you all with me? I'm sorry, the impulse is above. My preacher impulse is to talk to you.
This was my goal.
Talk back, right? No.
This was my intention. Just throw something in there from time to time and sit back and let you go.
This is our great hope, and it is about building a beloved community, one that isn't monolithic or monochromatic and there's nothing about it that's monocultural. Even if you're within your cultural group or your people group, there is diversity. This is one of the things that amazes me about predominantly white institutions, especially. I'm thinking white supremacy in this instance, right? And how it's co-opted, because no matter where you immigrate from or your people come from, here you become white, right? That's the box you check typically. But there is rarely the benefit of legibility of the richness and the multiplicity and diversity. And I'm not centering that, but I'm highlighting how much is stolen from the richness of all of us. I know that is true for the vast diasporic cultures and communities that exist in the world, that exists within Blackness, and more creativity keep emerging and uncovered through the archives and history. And that's what you witnessed at the last march. The Say Her Name is Afro-diasporic rituals and healing and practices and traditions being brought to bear and centered within our liberation struggle. Because it has a lot to offer, not just us, the people from whom it comes, it has a lot to offer the world, but not stolen from us, not taken and denied attribution, right? Or considered exotic and marginalized, only secondary to white intellectual and cultural and ways of thinking, being, and doing. Not at all. It is just as valid. And I'm not saying that to validate or authorize it. I'm saying that because it is so. It's just that we haven't had the benefit of being taught in educational systems in such a way that creates that kind of expansiveness and curiosity and capacity to hold multiple centers at one time equally and with respect and reverence, and have the benefit of that, I think we would be further along as a society, as a democracy even. Or a democracy to be, I should say. So shall we, how are you feeling about where we are? Is there anything else we need to touch on? So yes, defunding the police does that, and defund the police, reimagine community safety and protection, certainly abolish prisons, a most savage and inhumane institution in the United States that goes hand in hand with what we saw in the.
We're all just trying to get free. Trying to get free.
But some of us don't know that we are unfree.
Absolutely. So I'd like to go to, I don't want to say audience because that assumes passivity. I want to go to our grouping here of people who've decided to be on this call. Before I do that, I'd briefly like to mention something from folks who are sort of watchdogs at the Massachusetts State House on Beacon Hill, looking at what our elected officials are doing, people who call themselves public servants. Not too long ago, people may be familiar with a police reform bill that was before the House and the Senate. And in the House, supermajority Democrat, over 80% Democrat, okay? There was an amendment filed by my friend in Somerville, Cambridge State Representative Mike Connolly to ban tear gas to deal with the militarization of police as an occupying force in our communities. Banning tear gas. That failed 121 to 38. I will repeat, the amendment to ban tear gas in Massachusetts from law enforcement failed 121 to 38. 38. So I'm glad that Karlene touched on this earlier about a sense of distance that some people may feel against certain issues when we talk about white supremacy. This is by no means a Southern problem, an other problem, an outside problem. Folks are complicit, and this is the air we breathe. This is the water we swim in. And certain people in northern and coastal states that believe in their own moral superiority and self-righteousness, looking down on others, that attitude has no place in our movement. Be expansive and inclusive and honest and self-reflective. And I think folks in Massachusetts in particular who want to save others need to look inward, need to look locally, need to look in their backyards, need to look at people who are representing them or claim to represent them are doing with the power that they are granted. Here and now. So Cole, I don't know if you'd like to facilitate any questions that are coming in from the chat, or if we're going to have folks speak up. I'd very much like to hear voices that have showed up tonight.
Yeah, I've got some questions that have come in. Ann Ferguson asks, how do we explain how defunding the police makes everyone freer? At the same time, it supports the rights of people of color against racist police violence.
How do you explain it? Would you read that?
I think she means, how do you make the case that it not only defends the rights of people of color against racist police violence, but in the process, it also makes everyone freer.
I assume this is, and the questioner can correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume this is how to make an argument to people that do not agree with us about this.
I think so, yeah, right.
Do you want to speak to that, Jared?
Please, Karlene, I defer.
You know, I don't know how many other ways to make it clear that policing in the United States and policing as we know it emerged out of a violent, unjust, inhumane imaginary. And that was to capture and you know, arbitrarily at that time, just as it continues to do, kill, murder, return Black bodies to and contain return to owners and contain Black bodies to with impunity, criminalize. There is no redeeming a system that has been constructed with these presuppositions. And the presupposition being to protect white property and to protect white lives. If that isn't the case enough, again, we're speaking about a system. We're not talking about, but police officers, haven't you seen the videos where they're dancing with the kids or where they're giving them ice cream, or my son-in-law is a cop and he's a good guy? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that is inherently flawed. And so the reason I hesitated to delve into this is that it isn't, some of us, I think, do that conversion work. And I think some of us are called to do that at your kitchen table, at your family gatherings, in your place of work, in your spheres of influence and power. Do that difficult work, organize there and put yourselves and your privileges on the line. And so I completely understand that. And a part of it is understanding this history. A part of it is listening to those who are most impacted by it, by policing. Listen to those narratives. And the reality is that if you are white, it doesn't matter your class or circumstances, whiteness protects you, right? That's the issue about class, and there is a conversation for that. But this evil of racialization and pigmentocracy creates intrinsic fear in police, but it gives them the power to kill, the power to surveil and to contain and to detain and to wreak havoc. Are you all getting my point? Inherent in the system are its flaws. What is a challenge is for people to relinquish the idea, even if it does, even if it isn't for you. Are you willing to be a participant in a system that murders, that kills, that robs the liberty and attempts to efface the dignity of your neighbor? And your neighbor to me isn't the person on your street. I mean this in a more broad sense. Your neighbor are your fellow human beings. And so I'm sure there's more to be said about that. If you want to add something or yeah. Jared or Cole in any case. And so you know, we are making the case, and we're making the case quite well as those who are impacted, as indigenous folk, as folk across the world. And if you tie policing to militarization, it makes it all the stronger as well. Because when the local police becomes militarized, you are not safe either. If you will stand over and against them, that in and of itself tells you. Cole knows that this video that was shown a couple months ago. Where was the city when the elder white gentleman was just knocked out? A 76-year-old.
Buffalo, I think.
Buffalo. I keep forgetting the city. The visual, the optics of it was. It gripped me, but it also foreshadows and tells the story, as are many other instances, by the way, but that one in particular, to see that those who may go home and reverence their elder family member, right, or reverence their neighbor and help them nicely to cross the street, once they get don the apparatus of the state and have the authority and power to do so, pushes an elderly man out the way to great peril, because the fragility and the vulnerability in the face of such force, like a gnat. That is the logics playing out, and none of us are safe.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I don't mean to.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let me keep going. Manuel Pintado says, in 2016 and 2017, I was at many meetings when we tried to pass a bill to eliminate mandatory minimums. The majority of sheriffs from Massachusetts were against it. Police are ran by big money. Any comment?
I believe Manuel's commenting on that in the chat.
Yes, and I was just reading his.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he says that was not my question. I don't know what it means, but well, I did my best to read what he wrote. Maybe we should let him speak for himself. Where's Manuel? Mm-hmm. Let me see here. Manuel, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone. I want to say thank you to Jared, Paul, Karlene for, this is just amazing. Not only because you are teaching us about many facets that we a lot don't know about, but you know, it's a way for us to all find out what can we do to stop this destruction of our system, destruction of the people. So thank you, Cole. But the question I wanted, my first question was, let's talk a little bit about Operation Paperclip and how this brought the Nazis into this country, who they manipulated all the organizations, including the judicial system, the political system, the CIA, later the NSA, and now ICE. Because I think this has to do a lot with what happened in the 1964 civil rights movement and what's happening now. Are you familiar with Operation Paperclip?
I don't think I'm as familiar with Operation Paperclip.
Okay, let me just tell you what happened. In 1964, right after World War II, the controversial secret United States intelligence program brought Nazi German scientists to America to harness their brain for Cold War initiatives. Trailing behind Allied combat troops, these people who were in charge of Auschwitz and all the destruction that happened during the Holocaust, they were bringing carte blanche, and they didn't even get a test to become citizens. They were given citizenship right away. And then some of this offspring of these people became members of groups like the CIA, the NSA, and now they're involved in Congress. And this is a fact. And people need to know about this.
Manuel, maybe we could do a seminar on Operation Paperclip.
I would love to.
Like a deep dive is necessary there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because a lot of people don't know. I mean, I asked about 300 students of UMass. They have no idea what Operation Paperclip is.
Well, that's no accident, is it?
Well, you know, the 1% don't let anybody teach anything that is not, you know, for the 1%. So thank you, Cole. What happened in 2016 and 2017 is we were trying to pass eliminate mandatory minimums because we thought the mandatory minimum was affecting a lot of people who went to prison. And it was even before they passed the law that, you know, the marijuana was going to be legal. And it was, it went to a vote and the State House completely voted down, but it had because a lot of those police officers who went to testify, sheriffs and everybody, they were saying that people, that African Americans learn more being in prison. And you know, the prison system is not a rehabilitation system to me, because I was in prison in Florida for other reasons, but for me, it's a punishment system. It has to do a lot with the new Jim Crow laws that Margaret Alexander spoke about. Not to even talk about private prisons now. So it's all connected to this white supremacists. Sorry, I'm pushing all this on you, but I think it's just necessary that people start talking about this.
I'm sure folks here appreciate the insight and information you shared. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Jared.
Thank you, Manuel.
Okay, let me go to Edie Rees. She asks, would you address the campaign for reparations?
Oh boy. Another difficult subject for the United States. When it comes to reparations for Black people, that is, you know, we know that Jewish folk received reparations. We know that for internment, the Japanese received reparations. But you know, I'm not sure what to say about that, except that it's gaining much more traction now. And unfortunately, the dog whistle or the framing of the idea of reparations is that Black folk are looking for a handout, or that there's no way to quantify reparations. But you know, and reparations is not to only be thought of in terms of money or economically or a check, but it is to be thought of in all of the ways in which enslavement and oppression and dehumanization have stolen and robbed and killed and destroyed the lives of Black people. And I don't say that theoretically. I say that as a reality, right? And we see it manifesting in our systems. So how do we think in terms of reparations when we think about access to land and habitation and housing, when we think about access to education? What are the ways in which reparations can happen and be infused or integrated such that there aren't these disparities and disproportionality of access of wealth? You know, in Matt, we saw the report a few years ago now, what, about 3 years ago, that it was a spotlight report that talked about the wealth gap in the city of Boston, right? That happened out of very real structural designs within our system, right, that doesn't afford generational wealth or accumulation of wealth. And I'm not saying this to propagate a capitalistic mode of being. That's not the point of my comment. I am saying it to acknowledge that systems and structures are designed that way, that inherently disadvantages, right, people of African descent. We never got 40 acres and a mule. Redlining was very real, right? It is the reality that those who accumulate wealth or advance generationally, economically, do so through land ownership or access to the economic resources in such as the system such as it is, right? So when we think about reparations, we should think most generously when it comes to reparations for Black people. We should think most integratively in terms of how generational wealth is gained by folk who are typically white, and the disproportionality. We should think in terms of relinquishing wealth and personal things that one can do. And I'm not talking about, you know, oh, I sent a check to, excuse me, you all have heard, many have heard this, my intersectional life is at work. Yes, yes. Apologies. Mommy is never off, especially Zooming at home.
Karlene, please do not ever apologize for that.
So, you know, personal responsibility, because whether you choose to or not, you participate. And that can manifest in different ways. But so economic, though, it's just one aspect of it. But I also think it's the most difficult thing, because somehow identity in the United States is based on property ownership, me and mine, and having accumulation, because it gives us personal security, it buttresses identity and a sense of accomplishment and worth and value, right? What do we call it? Net worth. Over and against the lives of other people. Our house, our property, who do we keep out? Who do we not want to be our neighbors? Because of what? Fear of our property value going down, and buying into all of these narratives about Muslim people, about Black people in particular, about safety, about crime. Who do we not want the zoning laws in our neighborhoods and the unfair regentrification that increases tax value and excludes and keeps out and creates a Jim Crow segregational lines as to who has access to our neighborhood, to live next door? How do you solve that from a reparations point of view? What do you advocate for and fight for? Am I making sense?
Yes.
So reparations is needed. Black folk have earned and deserve, but there is no amount of anything that can compensate. But that is no reason to not do due diligence and to make a good faith effort to correct and to provide restitution in so much as it can do good and be a benefit. Do we have another question?
Karlene, before we move on, do you mind if I touch on that briefly?
Oh, absolutely. Forgive me, Jared. Go right ahead.
Nope. So thank you so much for laying out the case again for reparations. I think better even than Ta-Nehisi Coates. So I appreciate that. When I think of reparations, I think of Reconstruction, which to me is maybe the most fascinating period in United States history, because there was a real opportunity. There was an opening, there was a gateway, there was promise, there was hope, there was an effort by some to create the country that people dream America is or could or should be. For the first time, that was on the table. That was an option. And it was a dream deferred because there were many gains made. There was a lot of progress. And in a very short period of time, nearly all of it was washed away. And, you know, there are many books you can read and interviews you can watch and documentaries about this subject. So you should check that out. But my piece on it is Reconstruction mainly failed as a project because white people gave up. White Northerners gave up. They lacked the willpower, the staying power, the commitment, dedication, and solidarity to see it through in a significant way for the long term against a racial caste system, an aristocracy in the former Confederacy, and were unwilling to persist and persevere against white terrorism and violence. Vigilantes like the Klan who wanted to continue a system, again, of subjugation, degradation, and destruction. And to me, when I think of this period of time, some folks call the civil rights movement, for example, the second Reconstruction. Many are calling now for a third Reconstruction.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that.
When we really do, if we seize it, if we answer the call to action, we can be our heroes. We can save ourselves. We can do what must be done. But it's going to take mass mobilization, mass movement of the multiracial working class. It's going to take people arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, doing it for as long as it takes, even if it's the rest of our lives. And I know that many in my generation, as a millennial, are ready to step up and continue to be radicalized and organized and brought in and taught how to move through this work, how to fight for liberation. I'm inspired by the possibilities, the potentialities of those things, to look at what was accomplished before and why and how it did not last, and what could be done now that is in our hands, because we have agency, we have the capability, but we need the numbers, we need the strategy, we need the brains of people like Karlene, and the compassion that is strong, the resolve that is steely, that is focused, that is disciplined, that does not waver and go in and out of despair and optimism. We need a resilient hope that we continuously do the work to build and provide to others, to bring in more, to build our power to win the fights and the world that we deserve.
Thank you. That was so well said, and I'm so grateful. And we, not to add anything to what you've said, you reminded me that it will also take deep empathy, right? And it's difficult to have empathy for others if we don't rightly understand the problem that we're facing is a problem, is all of our problems. It's not just Black people's problem. It's all of our problems, right? And so deep self-empathy to know that what we call, the thing we call white fragility is real, and it's a farce from the standpoint of no one's perfect. It requires humility, but it also requires self-honesty, right? Self-criticism, not the beating yourself up to the point where it immobilizes and it creates fear. It's the total opposite of what we need. It's to say, hey, that's human, right? White supremacy co-ops humanity. So humility and empathy, self-empathy, therefore, and then learning to have empathy with others, you know, and figuring out the right places to work that out. It isn't within the communities that are also straight. It's not with Black people. Let me just be plain, right? But that is real work, and the kind of courage that it takes, that's the enemy of the kind of solidarity that we're invoking. Am I making sense? Yes. So it definitely is, it is our time, but it's also an intergenerational time. And the last thing I'll say, take very seriously the genius, the vision, the capabilities and capacities of those who are in the streets rising up, of the ideas. It may be scary, it might not be what you would do, but trust Black leadership. And if I may say so, trust the leadership of women, Black women, identified folk. Trust the leadership of those who are fighting not only for our lives, millennials like Jared and others, they're in the street, those whose culture, be it the music, the tattoos, the aesthetic, the mode of speaking, or the mode of getting at it, that is so different from you. Don't be dismissive. Don't let xenophobia or fear or lack of understanding or lack of information, but most of all, lack of relationship, that distal gaze that I talked about earlier, don't let that sabotage your would-be courage. And it doesn't mean that we're always right, but neither have the 400 years of white male leadership that we've entrusted our lives to, and these systems to. Am I right? They get chance after chance after chance of every garden variety. And this is where we are. So it's time. I'll stop there. It's time.
It is time, Karlene. It's also time for us to wind down.
It is.
Looking at the clock here, Cole being the timekeeper. Thank you, Karlene, so much. Courage, empathy, intergenerational struggle, seeing ourselves in others, and what we need to do. I so appreciate you. Karlene, I'm going to give you the last word, if you would like it, to close us out for this evening. Thank you so much again for everyone being part of this tonight.
Thank you, Jared. I am deeply grateful for the invitation. Cole, thank you for organizing this. Jared, as I knew, you are an excellent interlocutor and conversation partner. I'm also grateful for those who have taken your time to come and be with us and think with us and struggle with us in what we call the beautiful struggle. Thank you for showing up here. And I hope to see you, continue to see you in the streets or however that manifests. But hang on to this, and that is that we will win. That's what we say in our movement, because we cannot afford not to. So thank you all. Have a beautiful evening and stay strong. Peace and blessings.